I am joined today by Andy Wong. Andy has had an illustrious career as a software engineer at 3 of the 5 FAANG companies, including Amazon, Google, and currently Meta. In addition to his professional achievements, Andy has amassed an impressive following of over 30,000 on LinkedIn. He has a distinctive blend of insight, wit, and dry humor that I have found I have enjoyed as a witness to, and I've gotten the pleasure of getting to know via LinkedIn. So, Andy, thank you so much for joining me today on Couple of Conversations.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I know we spoke briefly before this in another kind of one-on-one coffee chat. Um, I had a lot of fun. I found that we had a lot of common ground, so I was really appreciated the opportunity to kind of come back and kind of speak more formally on camera.
Awesome. Well, I would love to talk to you today about what it's like working at FANG companies. But before we get into that, I would love to know more about your journey. How did you get into software engineering? Why did you pick this career?
If I'm being honest, a lot of people seem to skip over like the first 4 or 5 plus college years of my life because there's so much attention put onto what I've done the most recent few years. Um, but I graduated from Tufts University in 2013 with a double major in like English and psych. I wasn't really finding a whole lot of job opportunities. I kind of came out and I was like, hey, I got a degree in like psych, but like whoop-de-doo, you can't really do much with that unless you pursue like an advanced degree. And I'm like, I'm already tired of school. I'm not going to do that. Was never really much into research, so I'm kind of just like narrowing my realm of possibilities just out the gate. I did have family support. I'm still close to them. But my brother was a software engineer at the time. So, I mean, he's always been trying to get encourage me to like explore skills, given that we are pretty similar. And so I think one day he had forwarded me a role. Kind of started like on Code Academy, just like online tutorial type stuff. I actually ran into a peer from school who was like introduced me to this kind of world of like coding boot camps. This is back in like 2014ish when the whole idea of like pivoting careers into tech was still fairly new, and so went through that program. I did not find a job immediately, which I feel is pretty much like the norm nowadays. It took me about like a year to find my first role. It's funny when folks comment on like where I am now, but then I periodically remind folks like, hey, like I started like really badly. Like I was like the last person in my cohort to even find a role. And it wasn't like I started, at some glitzy brand name, trendy like spot location. I worked as kind of on like a very small team. It was basically the only tech team embedded within like a digital advertising agency. So not even like a tech company, but I thought it was really kind of fortuitous because it kind of gave me an opportunity to really work closely with peers and like learn how to do things like hard way. Um, and so I was there for 3 years, and in that time met my then girlfriend, current wife, got married, started talking kids, and then I think that was she takes a lot of credit for kind of like pushing me in the direction of being like, hey, let's actually like actualize your potential, because I'm still kind of like a very like company kind of dude. I had plans of like, yeah, I'm gonna stay for a while and collect benefits and all that stuff, but she's like, no. Um, so I ended up moving on after 3 years to my next role at Wayfair. Was there for a few years as well, and then that kind of organically led me down a path of just kind of like pursuing larger opportunities, um, leading up to where I am now, which is at Meta, which I'm, very happy with.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your sort of circuitous journey to where you are today. I think that it is easy for people, myself included, to look at your profile, let's say on LinkedIn, and go, oh my gosh, look at the last few years, and overlook the fact that you didn't get a degree in computer science and didn't follow the sort of normal trajectory. So I appreciate you highlighting that, because I think a lot of people right now are struggling with the path. And so it's nice to hear that you managed to achieve a really impressive track record. Again, not having jumped into that right away in academia. How do you feel about boot camps in general?
When I think about like programs like boot camps or programs like in general, um, I try to understand like what is the problem that they're trying to solve, like, and are those problems that still exist or evolve? Obviously, I think with the job market since I've graduated and since I've gotten into the field has gotten a bit more, um, let's call it macroeconomically vulnerable is how I describe it. I think what we're seeing with some programs across the country kind of like shuttering down or just running out of resources to continue has been like one aftershock. Um, uh, I mean, my personal experience, and I think my when I first got into it, I got a really like honest take. Like I'd asked if I mentioned I had met a peer who went to the same program who gave me the idea, and I kind of asked them up front, like, "Hey, did you feel like graduating you learned everything that you needed to know from a skill perspective to succeed in like a full time role?" And he was like, "No, but it's the networking, the introductions you make, and sort of auxiliary skills." I mean, historically, I feel like a lot of them are just you get what you pay for, or at least like you get what you put in. If you were to ask me like, hey, if I, gave you this candidate and they're working on like really relevant technologies and only for like, shorter than whatever the traditional college route, like, would you hire them? I'd probably be more like personally more inclined um, to, just because, as someone who's worked in the field for almost a decade now, which is kind of shocking to me that I've been in this field for almost a decade. But, I know you don't need to know a ton of really good programming to be a good software engineer. It's spoiler alert, like less than the 4 years of a college, in my opinion. Um, and at that point, once you reach that technical bar, it comes down to a lot of other like attributes. But I feel like the ideal um, amount of kind of like learning and prep that I would feel comfortable with interviewing a candidate is sort of like more than what boot camps offer. And so I think that's why, some programs that I've kind of heard about and kind of reviewed on my own, like the really good ones are the ones that usually do take a longer term approach, like, 6 months, 9 months to a year. And that's what I would probably suggest to anyone who's like still considering such programs in 2024 is like really dig deep into how long is the program, what kind of support they're offering. Support being a huge factor, because a common critique of programs that I've seen or heard is that a lot of graduates kind of come out and they didn't absorb enough of the kind of like how to continue teaching yourself or how to continue road mapping. Um, so, I mean, one of the top things that I do, which I think folks find helpful, is I just link them to like roadmap.sh or some of these other websites that just kind of go over high level, like here's some topics and stuff that you can learn on your own. Because I think boot camps, because they are so time constrained, don't necessarily go into that aspect of like how to continue doing like self-guided learning. So like TLDR, um, I'm probably more pessimistic about programs nowadays. I do think they served a purpose, and I do think that there is like a path for them to evolve, because they should evolve. Like I think anything that is relevant should continue to evolve and change and adapt. Um, and I feel like the best programs will be the ones that ultimately continue to update and tune their offerings and take advantage of new learning tools, and continue to offer like enough support after the fact. And then all the other programs that don't, well, nice to know you.
A question that I get asked a lot is around these FANG companies that you've had an experience with now. Because you touched on interviewing, I have heard that the process for interviewing with them is so grueling. It's notoriously grueling. Was that your experience? And do you think it's justifiable?
I can say pretty bluntly that I over prepared in a lot of ways. And given I did a lot of my like first real rounds of prep like before I had kids. So for me, like grueling is right up my alley. Depending on where you look, you might find that um, there's a lot of like almost gamification of interview preparation for like really large companies that have a fairly like standardized process. You know, depending on where someone's applying, my advice may come down to just like, okay, like go to this website, look up problems that company has asked and just like brute force it for like a month or two or whatever. It's like more often than not, if they do, it's like, hey, you'll get hired or at least do really well or get some more feedback. Um, it's kind of like sometimes it feels a little bit cat and mouse. I don't personally find it very helpful just because like I as an interviewer, like I can tell when someone has like done all that stuff and they're just like opening up a canned response. But at the same time, it's like good to see that someone actually did all the work. And it's like, yeah, it's better to see someone who came in and just like over prepare than someone who just did like no prep and is just kind of like struggling to give really poor answers, like a behavioral. Um, and I think the most reasonable response, and this is back for like a manager at a previous company, was like the processes that we have are the worst thing we've ever done, except for everything we did before, which was worse. I'm a very strong believer that a lot of what we see and observe and ultimately complain about on social media is a byproduct of the purveyors of these processes just implementing things that maybe they aren't the best, but they work well enough and they scale well enough. And that is sort of the bigger concern when we're talking about, growing organizations with like, 5-digit employee count and the inability to really like devote enough resources to actually create something better. Like I see like, startup LinkedIn posts about folks who are like, yeah, I would never do that. I would just, sit them down and ask them some questions and just make a call. It's like, great, you can do that because you have the time to. You're, a manager who can spare an hour a day speaking with candidates. Leadership here, they're in meetings constantly. Like it's just a misalignment of how um, you know human time and resources are fundamentally different at different levels of a corporation. So again, it's like I don't think anybody's saying they love the way that companies at this level hire. I don't think anyone would, not with a straight face, or not unless they were like selling a course. But it's just kind of again the worst thing that we can do, except for the stuff that sucked even more. So yeah, it's whatever. I can't really help it. I just tell folks like, hey, it's the game. It's like, hey, there's lists of other places. It's just, blech. Just leaves a gross feeling in my mouth.
Speaking of the misalignment between these type of tech giants and smaller organizations, many people that I know, especially these smaller companies, have almost idealized the mythical ways, for lack of a better way of saying it, but the mythical ways that these FANG companies have organized and have developed. And they've done it so much so that they attempt to adopt the Spotify model or the Amazon pizza team model, and they fall flat on their face because their ideals are misaligned. And I'm wondering, is any of their perception of this mythical sort of organization real? And what advice do you have for people at these smaller organizations that are trying to achieve these types of outcomes but are not able to do so?
I would say uh, to the smaller companies, like, do you operate like a cult? If you do, then great. If you can't, then figure something else out. I've always been a big believer that like processes should be molded after whatever available resources you have, whether it's computer resources, human resources, whatever. I personally find that a lot of what I see from a process perspective, having worked at like very large companies, they're in place because maybe they may be the object of waves of public scrutiny, or they may have different constraints in terms of like how quickly they can move and break things, or release questionable product or whatever. um, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a company that doesn't kind of like nostalgize culture from like 5-10 years ago. It's kind of funny because like to the extent that smaller companies mythologize tech giants, um, a lot of tech giants, or at least like at the team and department level, they kind of idealize startup-y culture, um, by like organizing around smaller teams, or um, trying to be like really modular and like loosely aligned and all that stuff. Um, if I were starting if I were starting my own company, which may happen someday, who knows? It's an aspiration. I would just be like as lean as freaking possible. Because it's like when you don't have tons of users, it's like no one's gonna notice if something breaks. You just fix it ASAP. What gets lost is not so much like um, the success of what these large companies do, but sort of like the necessitation of certain things because they have uniquely BSC business requirements that require them to be like extra scrutinous. You pull Meta employees who've been there for like 10 years or so. You pull Google or Amazon employees who've been there for forever. They'll all say things were way different. It's all too common, and I think that is what people should pay more attention to. Is folks leaving and saying like, oh yeah, there was this spirit that these companies had, at onset, where the things that were really prized were, transparency and lack of red tape, et cetera, and so forth. And when you contrast that to, current day iterations where it's like, oh yeah, processes are in place that impact velocity or impact the freedom to um, get stuff done. There's actually one thing that I kind of like about Meta is that we've sort of maintained that sense of like, yeah, okay, like actual some level of autonomy. But we'll see. I don't have much more to add there.
What is one assumption that people make about FANG engineers that you'd like to rebuke?
That we're smart. I mean, look at me. Um, there are very few engineers at this level who are kind of like all the way around better than anyone else. I would say one difference is that when you do grow and adapt to a larger environment, like it helps if you're more like a niche or specialist, unless you're just like a super awesome generalist. But like, I've run into engineers in my career who you think like, knew everything, and maybe they do, but it's like they're also missing some gaps. Like, I had one kind of like staffish level engineer who was like, yeah, what's DDD? Which a lot of newcomers to the field might be familiar with. It stands for like domain driven design. It's like, covered in books that people just recommend all over the place. So, I mean, like, not everyone knows everything. Anyone who kind of can come is able to enter the room with that acknowledgement, um, and not be afraid to like present knowledge that maybe they assume someone else knows, but maybe they don't, is really valuable. Um, Knowledge sharing, especially at very large companies, is such a valuable attribute. I've had managers try to poach me before because they notice me writing and they notice that I'm very open about knowledge sharing and wisdom sharing. It's like that's not really common. Um, so I think even like, and which you think might be kind of like counterintuitive, because it's like, yeah, of course, if someone, is really high level and they're working at blah, they probably know a lot, they probably teach a lot. That's not necessarily the case. If you are someone, who I don't want to overuse this phrase, but like learns in public or builds in public or whatever, and you kind of have this demonstrable ability to share value and to break down like silos, or like you're probably going to be very valued very highly. But yeah, I mean, all of that said, like I I enjoy the teammates I have now. I enjoyed the teammates I had when I was really early in my career for very different reasons, but they're all, for the most part, really great engineers. So I don't knock or put either kind of era of my career on any particular pedestal.
Do you think, speaking of career, do you think it would be better for developers to join a FAANG engineering team early on in their career and learn there and really grow up there, or later in their career once they've cut their teeth somewhere else?
I have, I think it's a, I have differing opinions, and I go back and forth with this a little bit. Like, I've picked the second path, obviously, where I kind of explicitly imagine myself progressing through a certain path. If you are targeting a larger company, especially if you're coming through like a very kind of like scrappy background, I would say go for it. I mean, the money's good, but also the place will always be around. But just be cognizant of um, the expectations, and be cognizant of the fact that, like, yeah, there's a lot of resources, but um, you may not always have access to all the help or resources you need, and it's very team dependent. There's a lot of factors that kind of go into the success of onboarding here, just because these orgs are so large that the internal variance. I tell folks all the time, the internal variance within like any large company X or Y is probably going to be like a bigger difference, or bigger difference maker than deciding between companies in general. Um, I do feel, especially early in your career, growth is probably the most important thing. Um, so like with folks I get this question as well sometimes. It's like, hey, I want to someday go to X or Y, but I have a startup, like an offer to start up now. Should I take it? And I'd be like, probably. There's a much higher likelihood that you will, actually be able to build something like greenfield or like from the ground up that you just won't get here. Um, there's a much higher likelihood that you'll actually have a chance to influence the technical decision making that you won't really have here, not without a lot of friction. Um, but it's sort of, it can be a little bit challenging because, like, going from a smaller company that you cut your teeth on to someplace larger, like the downside of the cut your teeth somewhere else and bring it over is that oftentimes larger companies will try to like down level you, or like try to like, get you to accept lesser, like lesser in the sense of like your title, not lesser in the sense of the compensation. Just because a lot of companies at this size will be like, well, they never, worked on a thing that touched 1 billion users, so it's kind of like, we need to like let them prove it. So I think either path is viable in a vacuum, but I think if when you do kind of make that transition, it really helps if you're able to kind of like speak the lingo, so to speak, so that you're not really losing sort of this like figurative progress that you're making in your career. Um, so it's like, yeah, it, it really depends on how you market yourself, but we can apply that knowledge to anywhere. But if you were to ask me again, like, would I cut my teeth on the way that I did earlier, and or just do things the other way around, I would probably still do something similar. Do what you have the ability to tolerate from like a risk perspective. Like, I'm obviously a little bit older and have family, and I am incredibly risk aversive. Um, but I understand that that has, as a result, led me to rebuke some opportunities that maybe if I were still single and had like all this time to myself, I'd be like, yeah, that sounds really interesting. Those are actually problems I'd like to solve. So that's like one regret, is that I didn't take more advantage of that kind of early in my career. So, but maybe, maybe all you care about is like making bank and getting benefits and all that stuff, and being a spoiled baby, and retiring at 40 and launching all your own like interview prep courses and all that junk. I don't have any aspirations like that, because I don't like to sell junk. I just like to work and then go home and get a stable paycheck at a stable company. But you know, uh, your cup of tea.
Well, now you just crushed my dreams. I was planning on retiring at 40 and selling a bunch of junk, so I'll have to switch. I'm just kidding. Um, I am curious, do you believe in luck? Do you believe that, especially in the context of where you end up and where your career goes, how much do you think luck plays a part in that journey?
Uh, at least half, to be honest. When you think about sort of how getting into large companies works, at least in my personal experience, it's like, hey, yeah, you interview at a place, and you know, it whether you get in or not kind of hinges on you, waking up that morning and being in a certain state of mind, and you get interviewers who are generally, hopefully, really experienced, and they aren't asking you anything that's like over the top. All the places that I've worked at recently, like I've interviewed multiple times, because the first time was kind of like I just didn't really have good luck, and after the next time I had really great luck. Um, there's just so much variance in terms of like variance within these opportunities that you get in your, particularly like your software engineering career, where you know your fate is up to someone else, and who that someone else is can make a big difference. But I've also had just weirdly good timing, where some decisions I've made where I've thought like, that's not going to work out, but they kind of ended up working out. um I get some folks have privately pinged me after I joined Meta, um which was like right before like round of layoffs at Block, and they're like, oh, how'd you predict that? You look like a genius. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I just kind of read the room and take a gamble, and it's like, hey, sometimes it works out. I have this kind of like pet peeve sometimes, where whenever I see, this is like related tangent, but I'm personally kind of a little bit annoyed whenever I see other engineers who are at like a similar level, and they're just trying to like sell folks on, yeah, here's like keys to a certain career trajectory, and it totally abandons that luck element. It's like, yeah, can you achieve the things that myself or others have in X time frame? And I'm like, yeah, sure, but you have to have good managers. You have to know how to find the right teams. You have to make sure that you're, navigating the right projects, and things don't, departments and teams will get fired on you. There's so much stuff that can happen that I think kind of throws the premise of like trying to sell someone on a certain trajectory out the window. Like, folks ask me all the time, like, "Hey, what's your journey?" And I'm happy to tell them, but I also have to couch things by saying like, "But my journey was really weird, and there's a lot of like make or break moments." Um, and I I would not put that on a billboard, is that what I would say. Like, I would not tell someone like, yeah, just like, go to a program and then mess around for a year, and then, be one bad interview away from just being like, screw it, maybe this isn't what I want to do. Um, I think there's some lessons to be learned, but I would never tell someone like, I'm going to tell you what I did and hope that you produce it. I'm going to be like, I'm going to tell you what I did, and hopefully you avoid some of the things I did, and you avoid enough of those things enough that maybe you have a better judgment than I did. That's the real like promise, is just like what not to do, not what you should do, because what you should do um, would take you, you know, 5 or 6 years to really hit a gold mine.
Well, speaking of advice, I can only imagine how many times you get reached out to on LinkedIn or other channels looking for help of how to navigate the waters of getting into these big organizations. probably many pleading with you to help them get into these organizations. How does that make you feel? And my second question to this is, what do you wish they knew? What do you wish maybe they did differently when approaching someone like yourself? Because again, I imagine that's pretty frequent for you.
Reach outs are fine. Like I try my best to get around to everyone. Um, uh, it's just there's something about um, this like idea of being a figure that some non-trivial amount of people follow that makes me like uncomfortable. I would say for me, I still approach how I perceive myself and how I write and communicate and go about my stuff as if no one cared who I was, and it's like freeing. Um, I know some, not to name anyone, but I know some influencers, quote unquote influencers, whatever, um, who they don't talk to anyone. They're just like, here's a thing that I think or say, and it's like it feels disingenuous, and it feels like there's a weird power dynamic. But it's like, no, I try really hard to shape this idea that like, yeah, I'm the same as you, and I think it's how I've helped distinguish myself. Um, it's always funny to me when someone messages me and they're like, "Oh, I know you might not see this," and then I respond after 2 seconds, like, "Yes, I do." It's like I respond to everyone, and they're like, "Oh my god, you responded." Um, so how does it make me feel? It just makes me feel like a person. What do I wish people knew is, I mean, well, my mood dictates a lot of how I act sometimes. I have certain, ground rules. Um, if you're just coming out and asking for a favor, it's like, I'm probably not going to respond, or I'm probably very deflective. Um, I'm not totally unbiased. I have some biases. It's in my headline. I'm generally more favorable or preferential. If you're coming at me from a certain background, you resonate with something I say or something that I devoted myself as a mission, probably be more inclined to go out of my way to help. Um, I feel like early in my career when I had more time to myself, I really spent a lot of time just like over responding to folks and being like, hey, I know you're asked for this, but I kind of know where this is going. So just here's my brain dump. And I think they kind of help because it's kind of like, oh, yeah, I've known some folks who've been around for a while and they kind of know who I am. They know how approachable I am, for better or worse. I just think, I just hope people um, take a moment to like even read the most recent thing I posted or anything that I really posted. And please don't come at me with like AI generated blogs. I can't tell you how many of my recent connections are just like, hey, Andy, I'm connecting with you because I'd like to expand my network. I'm like, that is totally asinine and totally generated. And it's kind of like, just like, I would much rather someone just message me and be like, hey, what's up? Because I never get that. Um, like, how's the kids? What are you listening to? Why is your hair uneven? Um, where you been? Like, write something like that. Um, and I grew up in an internet, so I've seen a lot of change, and um, I'm very aware of how the media we consume kind of influences us. So, to the extent that I see anyone who kind of preserves that spirit of like, yeah, you're the person talking to another person via computer, but you're not, a person who is a computer talking to a person, I think that resonates with me the most. I mean, social media, LinkedIn, it's all really ultimately a little bit transactional just because, like, hey, it's a platform that isn't in the backdrop of like job searching. So, like, of course, I get that part, but it's just there's a lot of different ways to navigate to that point. And I think ultimately um, it's more beneficial for someone to just try to think of it as like making friends, like it's early 2000s and we're all just being weirdos on AOL Instant Messenger. I know I was that weirdo, just like popping in random chat rooms to just try to say something that isn't bot generated. um, I mean, yeah, that's where my weirdness comes from. Too much internet too early.
Well, I I'm very grateful for your approachability. Had you not been the way that you are, I would never have gotten a response to my message to you. Something I'm sure I was commenting on your content because I love the way you write. I love how you tell stories. I love how you keep me guessing, and then it's usually some sort of dry twist. And I always enjoy that. And you've also had a lot of really using humor, but you've also had a lot of really poignant opinions about the job market and how people are entering this career and how to go about approaching, I think, not just big tech but software engineering in general and hiring. So it really resonated with me. So I'm very grateful because had you not, like I said, been your approachable self, we wouldn't be talking today. And I similarly try to adopt a very similar ethos to you, which I approach people with curiosity. I am often the dumbest person in the room, and that's a good thing because I have a lot to learn. And I learned a lot from you today. And thank you so much for joining me on Couple of Conversations and sharing about, as I mentioned before, your circuitous and very successful journey to date. I'm excited to be in your orbit and see where the rest of this goes.
Sure thing. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And to anyone else listening, like, hey, feel free to invite me to your show. I'm sure I will bump your viewer count from 0 to 1, or and then 1 back to 0.
That's what I'm counting on.